Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the League of Inches podcast. Player interview specials once again. And we teased it from the outset of this episode. And I really do appreciate everyone so far out there who has listened to this episode. It has gone gangbusters on YouTube. I looked at some numbers this morning and really do appreciate that, everyone out there. So he has promised and he has delivered to come back for a part two. And here we are. So Jamie Soward, welcome back to part two. And in your own words, it's going to be about the Penrith Panthers dad club and also some rep footy.
Yeah, mate, it's good to be back. And obviously, last week we had a lot of fun talking about the early part of my career and the Dragon success. But I think the Penrith, time at Penrith and, obviously they're in the grand final again this week, but my time out at Penrith and then moving into being a dad, sort of the second half of my career going into fatherhood is probably the most interesting, I would reckon.
Yeah, no, definitely. And also we'll talk about the NRLW side of things, the grand final this weekend. Huge game ahead, getting the in-depth knowledge of one of the coaches there of that competition as well, which is really special for us. Quickly, seeing you all glitzed up on that red carpet on Wednesday night. Mate, you're looking sharp.
Yeah, credit goes to my wife. She pretty much dressed me, and every year I just turn up, mate. But she looked absolutely amazing, and it was one of those nights where I probably don't know if I'll be at too many more. So it was nice to just get along, and what a performance by Olivia Koenig in the NRLW, and that sort of surprised a few people. But she's been a consistent player all year, and obviously Jerome Hughes. I think most thought that he was going to win by a little bit more. But yeah, it was a really good night.
Yeah, no, it definitely was. We did a League of Inches Player of the Year where we did votes each week, and funnily enough, I think it was because he missed one of those key games at the end there. We had Teddy and Hughes drawing in the end, which was a bit crazy, but it was great to see Hughes get the recognition he deserved. And on Olivia, I just want to quickly ask you before we get into your career. You mentioned a few were surprised, and they might not know Olivia as well as maybe they should. Just as a coach, when you're coaching against her, just how crucial is it to get your job right against her, and how much has she improved this year?
Yeah, well, she's been always sound defensively, but I think the way that she's run the ball and held down that edge, we saw in Origin, I think potentially she's a 13. If I'm ever in that position of, being in charge of her as a coach, I think she potentially could hold down a 13 role in the rep scene and may play that for Australia. But big, tall body, physical, gets through her work and, holds down an edge. So I think, what the Roosters have done with her and Taryn Aitken on that edge, we thought probably Taryn Aitken and Isabel Kelly would poll a little bit more. And it's always hard when you do have so many stars, but she's been consistent in what she does. And she's been a huge part as to why the Roosters, are in that grand final position on Sunday.
Yeah, I think it's super special as well. We get to see both Dally and winners on the big stage this weekend, which we don't normally get to see. One of them always is from a lesser club that didn't finish as strong this year, but it's good to see both are from a really strong club, and they'll be there on grand final day. Your time at Penrith Panthers, does that intertwine basically with the dad club side of things?
Yeah, it does. So most people think that when I left the Dragons, it was on my own accord. I didn't want to leave the Dragons. In 2012, when Wayne had left, we'd finished ninth, and then 2013 rolled around, and I felt like I was in that sort of senior playmaker role and in the leadership group at the time. And it's well documented that Pricey and I really didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things. And looking back, I probably reflected that. And it happened again at Penrith, but I probably felt like I demanded a little bit more respect than what I'd been given at the time. And he was trying to change things, move me back to the left-hand side, but he was trying to be a coach and reset what I'd done and get me motivated to climb that mountain again. And I probably didn't agree with a lot of it. And looking back, there was probably a lot of my ego involved in that. And went to the club. I'd been approached by Penrith to go out there for 4 years. I'd been given one year by the club, and that for me is a no-brainer. You take the security, and I sort of hinted last week, like I felt like me and Gareth would have been a pretty handy pairing going forward, but it wasn't meant to be. I went out to Penrith, and instantly when I came back from England, I played, with a chip on my shoulder, and I wasn't in the greatest of shape. That preseason was really, really hard to come back from England and get involved. I'd done Kokoda with Ivan and Tim Grant and Justin Pascoe, and got that connection with Ivan, and wouldn't say that I set the world on fire in terms of first impressions, but went out there and connected with Peter Wallace, and we had a young Matt Moylan, we had James Seguiaro. Like, we just had a bunch of just really super talented guys that just really gelled together. And then we brought in the Isaiah Yo's and Bryce Cartwrights and those guys. So 2014 was one of those years where we had injuries. I mean, Elijah Taylor went down, Peter Wallace ended up going down. We ended up in a prelim final, which was remarkable to considering how many injuries we had. No one really picked us to do anything. And then it sort of started to fall away a little bit. 2015 started with, I think 17 of us had surgery after the 14 season. Yeah. We battled that, come back. We started 2-0. And I just remember before the first game, I started to get shooting pains down my left-hand side, and was dealing with some stuff away from the game in terms of divorce and breakdown through that side, but ended up getting surgery on my back for a discectomy, which shaves a disc down off the nerve to relieve that numbness down your leg. Unfortunately, had some complications and had to go in again 2 weeks later. So that sort of wrote the season off for me. And I was dealing with a lot of other stuff away from it. Fast forward to the end of 15, Hook comes in, and the same thing happened. I was super fit, wanted to try and impress Anthony Griffin, and I guess there was a sense of a little bit of what happened with me and Pricey. Like, I felt like, I was a premiership winner. I wanted to be in that position to be lent on, but probably wasn't doing enough within the four walls to be able to get that respect. And that's fine. Like, looking back, it's easy to try and be the victim, and I don't want to be the victim. I've realised that when you come into a little bit of maturity and all that kind of stuff, and I've spoken to Hook about that. I mean, I worked with Hook for 3 years at the Dragons, so we're well and truly past it. But yeah, it was just a different time for me. I was learning a lot about life, but probably didn't want to accept a lot of what was going on in my life at that time. And halfway through 16, I'd finished at Penrith. So it was a topsy-turvy time at Penrith. I really loved my time. There was a lot of good people out there that tried to help me, and at times you probably don't want to really take that help. And looking back, Ivan and Wall and those guys, I definitely wasn't the best version of myself, but I enjoyed the time out there, and that's where I met my beautiful wife now. And if I'd go through all that again to be where I am right now.
I want to quickly go back to something you mentioned, that Kokoda trip for yourself, and that's a journey in itself. I've heard a lot of stories about that that week or two that it takes to do, and the people you meet, the experiences you go through. It can really shape you and drive you, I guess, in life as well. Can you talk to us any stories around that walk and that little journey for yourself?
Yeah, again, mate, like, I think people don't really understand the selfishness you have to be at the top of your game. And I say that for people that don't understand, if you make the NRL, and I said it last week, it's not getting there, it's staying there. That's the hardest part. But if you're at that level, you are so self-involved, you are so routine, like you have to do what it takes to reapply for your job every single week. So when I did Kokoda, I'd come back from England. I was on a 4-year deal. I was going on Kokoda. I had no expectation of what it was going to be like. I knew it was going to be hard, but I didn't really, like, I wasn't going, oh my goodness, I'm going to learn about myself over there. It was more like, I have to do Kokoda. Gus wants me to do it. I'll connect with Ivan, whatever. That was how I'd sort of approached it. I ended up getting pissed with my best mate before we flew out because I was just hadn't seen him. I'd been in England, flew out the next day, didn't do any training for it. didn't wear in my shoes, had a backpack, climbed in, and it was bloody hard. Yeah. But was I there like going, oh, this will be the moment that I turn my career around? No, it wasn't like that. It was more about being in the moment. It was hard. We got lost twice. I remember walking. We did it with a lot of teenagers through the Panthers on the Prowl program that they'd run. And I remember walking with a 17-year-old kid who didn't talk too much. And, we got lost and we ended up where we shouldn't have been. But it was just a good experience. Now looking back, I understand what the Gus and Ivan were trying to do. But I didn't really, in the moment, think this is going to be something I hang my hat on and it's a life-changing moment. It was more about, okay, how do I hang tough in here? How do I get through this? And I did find a way through it. And probably looking back, that was the life lesson, is like it's going to be hard at times and I'm going to battle stuff, but I've just got to keep fighting my way through. And I think we walked 120 Ks in 6 days from the middle of Kokoda into or coming out. So great experience, super proud that I've done it. And, there were some amazing people I met on that journey. But, I wouldn't say I was in my tent at night thinking this is going to be the moment that changes me. I've never been like that because I've experienced some stuff that, I've been lucky and I haven't experienced a lot of other stuff that people have gone through. But I've experienced stuff at a different level. So I wouldn't say that it changed anything that I was doing.
Would you recommend it?
No. Like, 100%. Like it's an amazing thing. And, when people say, when I tell people, they're like, oh, you've done Kokoda. I was like, what was that like? And I go, yeah, it was hard. It was super hard. But, I think, it was just one of those things that I connected well with Ivan. I'd asked him questions. I'd walked with him for hours. And that was what it was about. It wasn't about me physically proving, that I could do it. But, it was just, I'm super proud that I've done it.
You mentioned Gus. I wanted to delve into that a little bit. I want to know what it's like dealing with Gus because he comes across as that really big senior authority, scary figure in a way. You sort of shit yourself when you get caught into that boardroom where it's a meeting with Gus. But at the same time, he also feels like that guy that once you build up a bit of trust with him, he's that guy that he'll go, you need me, call me type thing. He'll be one of those sorts of figures for you. What was it like? Was it at your point of your career a bit more senior? I think did you deal with him as well in your time at the Roosters at all?
Yeah,
was that,
yeah.
So
he was the coach of my first game because Sticky was in Origin.
Okay.
And then when I went out to Penrith, he'd gotten me out there. He was the GM of football at that time. And I think the one thing about Gus, you summed it up, is like I could text him now and still feel like, there's a bondship there. He'd helped me through some of the stuff that I was going through at Penrith. And, he's super smart in terms of footy and how he looks at the game and all that kind of stuff. And, I feel like he wants to help people. And he's helped a lot of footballers throughout their time. But I just really enjoyed the way that he talked about footy. And, I'd worked with Wayne and he was sort of the next coming of that. And I felt comfortable. And, looking back, I probably – would love to have rewarded him with a premiership or something like that. But I think when Gus talks, people listen, and sometimes it's understated actually how smart he is and how much he knows about the game and the experiences he's lived. So you can see why the Bulldogs have been so successful this year in helping Cam Serraldo, who's done a fantastic job, and he and his coaching staff and the standards that they've set. But there's also been some astute buys by Gus in and around the way that he looks at footy maybe a little bit differently. And I've been speaking recently about the lifestyle of footy versus actually loving it. And he loves the game and he loves helping his players.
Yeah, you've mentioned that Ivan Cleary. You obviously got to experience Ivan very early in his coaching career, and we all know the famous Gus. It was time to have a bit of a break for Ivan early on in his career, and it looks like a genius now. He's come back and look at Penrith flying now. But you're obviously the senior player there at Penrith, and then the inexperienced coach in Ivan. Did you see anything from Ivan? Obviously, coming from like the Wayne Bennett background, you've dealt with some fantastic coaches already in your career. could you sense that Ivan was one of those special coaches?
Yeah, I loved Ive. He'd already made a grand final in 11 with the Warriors. He'd have a saying, it's not black and white, it's grey. It's a grey game. And that for me was like not perfect, but wasn't going to get in trouble because he's not out there in that situation. And, he had some very valuable lessons. And like I said, at the time, he was probably trying to help me more than what I wanted or what I'd realised at the time. But he had great staff around him that had approached it in a different way, a bit more NFL-like. We had special teams, in terms of stats and measurements of how we wanted to keep things. And, I have no doubt that he's evolved and been able to shape himself into the great coach that he is right now. But, I enjoyed the fact that he'd let us play a little bit different to what it was probably a little bit similar to Wayne. Like it wasn't going to bash me up for not taking the ball to the line. Whereas I've had other coaches like, you got to run the ball, you got to do this, you got to do that. That was the grey part. He was let me be me without sort of pushing me into trying to be a mold of someone else. So I think at the time it was funny because they tried to get Jonathan Thurston and they tried to get Todd Carney and they sort of had to settle for me and Wall and we were successful as a pairing. So he's one of those guys that's young enough to be able to relate to his players, but also being around enough and an astute mind. And like this was 10 years ago. So I'd love to spend a week and see how he's evolved from when I'd had him right now in terms of watching him and how he communicates and all that kind of stuff, because I have no doubt right now that he's definitely at the top of his game.
We've all sat back now for almost 5 years it's been and witnessed this evolution of this almighty juggernaut of a club that's Penrith Panthers. You obviously were there like right at the start of this movement. Could you sense as you were leaving that club that they were starting to really get things right off the field, which then would translate on the field? And I don't think we could ever predict the success they've now got, but was it feeling like there was some special things happening?
Yeah, well, they'd had the Excellence Centre built just as I was, well, it was there for a couple of years, but, that was Jim Jones and Matt Cameron and Gus and all those people that work behind the scenes, Brian Fletcher, to be able to get that up and going. And then, when I left in 16, they had some success, 17, 18 with James Maloney. And then they sort of had a bit of a down year and then bounced back to what we've known now. But, guys like Isaiah Yeo, played reserve grade with Dylan Edwards, Jerome Luai, played one game with Nathan, and that was my last, his first, which is cool. But they've always had the juniors coming through, and people like Matt Cameron and Jim Jones are the recruitment gurus, along with Gus. Like they sort of started it in 14, and they've had those guys come through. A lot of those guys' success, was at the start of when they were bringing them through. They'd won 20s, they'd won a couple of reserve grade titles. So it was always off field. It was always set up to be successful, and it was a matter of time, before they became successful on the field. I don't think anyone envisioned 5 grand finals in a row and 3 premierships in a row, potentially 4, but the blueprint was there for them to be successful. That's for sure.
Crazy. One more final thing on the Penrith side of things. I want to talk to you about something you came out and mentioned. It was about your form. People were saying it wasn't quite there around the 2015 mark, and you came out quite publicly and you were vowing to walk away from the game if you didn't return to your best in 2016. I want to know why you sort of did that so publicly, because some people might say that's putting unwarranted pressure on yourself. But then there's others that would say, you know what, I want that pressure and I thrive off that sort of environment and I need that kick up the arse, basically. What was you thinking around that?
So Gus had pretty much told me to retire at the end of 2015. Whether that was a motivational thing or not, kicked me into gear. I was the fittest I'd been. I obviously had the surgery, but before that Christmas, I was pretty fit, or probably the fittest I'd been in a long time. The surgery put me back a little bit, but I think I've always played and lived life with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, and maybe I needed to put the pressure on myself. I don't think people realise, and this is not an excuse, but yeah, when you're dealing with a breakdown of your marriage, and you're financially losing a lot of stuff, and I wasn't living life how I should have been for a professional footballer, and I was dealing with a lot of stuff away from the game. That I'd lost focus, and maybe saying that publicly had put me back in the spotlight of being accountable to myself. So there's a lot of different things. I'd end up sitting down with Gus and said, I'm not going to retire. I'm going to work and show you and prove you. And he probably knew that I needed that chip on my shoulder. But I got through half the season, and then it just didn't work out. I thought I was playing all right in 2016, to be honest. Results determined that, but I thought I'd done enough to be able to see the season out, and it didn't work out that way, and that's fine. People make decisions. But yeah, I think that's probably the reason why.
I actually really value that, because I feel like there's a lot of people out there, not just in sport relation, but just in general, would like to just fly under the radar, and you just basically put the pressure on yourself and rise to the occasion, and just to prove the type of player and that fighting spirit, I guess, you've had throughout your career, which has made you the player you have. And that sort of gets us over to the rep side of football, and playing for the Blues, making your State of Origin debut, which would have been so special. That was back when you were with the Dragons. First of all, obviously, there's a lot of talk at the moment regarding the coaching side of things for the Blues. Love to pick your brain about, first of all, if you want to throw your hat in the ring as a coach for the Blues, and also, if not for yourself, if you have any recommendations out there, because it feels like there is so many names out there in this hat, and no one's really getting pulled out yet.
Yeah, like firstly, I'm not in the realm of the coaches for the New South Wales men's side. If an opportunity came on the women's side, I've made no secret about being an applicant for that. If they did decide to make a change there, and I feel like I've got some value and some ideas around to help the New South Wales Sky Blues. In terms of the men's positioning, though, there's been some names. I mean, Trent Barrett, Danny Badiris got knocked up yesterday by Andrew Johns. So I think it'd be really hard for the Blues right now, because they're the champs, to think that they've got to go away and get a coach with new ideas and a new plan. But I think they'll sit down and take their time here. There's no real rush over the next couple of weeks. Let it digest, sit down. Like I said, there'd be Trent Barrett, Paul McGregor, Matt King could jump out and be something that they could go at. I could potentially see someone like a Dean Young from the Dragons jumping out of the woodwork to be able to come up for that role. So there's a lot of great candidates. Don't be surprised if Ricky Stewart or Craig Bellamy find a way to throw themselves in there as well. So
Ivan's been mentioned as well. Who knows?
Oh, sorry, yeah. And the last one I was going to say is Ivan Cleary. If he's at that stage in his career where he feels like he can manage both and leave the team to Wall, then I'm sure he'll do it as well.
Yeah. So the Blues side of things, I want to know, first of all, who was your roomie for this Origin series? Was there one for each game, or was it a set roomie?
Usually, like, you room with your halves partner with Piercy, and Wayne just wanted me to be comfortable. Before I went in, like, Wayne actually helped me a lot through Origin. Even though he was a Queenslander, he just said, make sure you room with someone that you know and that you're comfortable with. So I think I roomed with Ben Cray and Bo Scott, more because Bowie was on my edge as well. But yeah, it was a great experience. Something that I'm super proud of. I don't talk about it much because we lost the series to a great side, but yeah, just being in that environment, I think the validation of being able to make it, and no one's ever going to sit there and say that I was one of the greats of the game, and I don't expect them to say that, or one of the great Origin 5'8" or whatever. But I worked really hard to be able to get to that point in my career. I felt like I delivered on the final stage to be able to get it to a point to that, and to lose a series 2-1 hurts, but it was a great experience and something I'll never forget.
There's no denying, in my opinion, the respect that you do deserve, and the out of the people that play rugby league, the ones that the small percentage that gets to go into the NRL, and then this even smaller percentage that gets to play State of Origin and for the Blues and pull that Blues jersey on, it's quite special. So I no doubt in my mind where you stand in the game. With that series, you mentioned it going up against it as a sort of a daunting task, that almighty Queensland team, but you only lost the series 2-1, and you were in it there for that series, and it wasn't a whitewash or anything. So talk to us just about the series as a whole, going in knowing, I guess, at that time, Queensland, how strong they were, and your sort of mentality, because from knowing you now and talking to you a couple of times, it feels like you've got that mentality of, I just want to beat these bastards, basically. Let me at them. I can do it.
Yeah, well, there was no – you're never scared. We knew that they'd won however many series in a row. I think their backline was Thurston, Lockyer, Inglis, Hodges, Boyd, maybe Tate, and then Slater at the back. So we knew that we were going to have to score points. Game one up at Suncorp, it was when the floods were on, so we warmed up in a little demountable out the back. And with 6 minutes to go, it's 12-8. Piercy scored. And I just remember playing with Piercy. It was really cool because he was such a big name, and he'd been such a professional in everything that he'd done. And, you know, I'd been sort of competing against him, so it was really cool to play alongside him. And sitting back now and talking footy, like, I love the way that he looked at the game then and how he reflects on it now. Like, he's really, really smart in how he articulates it and goes about it. And that probably didn't sink in at the time, but he was, you know, such a tough defender. And, you know, I probably didn't realize how much pressure he had on himself, you know, from him, but also everyone else to fly that flag. But Jennings scored, Piercy scored, 12-8, 6 to go. We kicked the ball, and then Slater makes a run. And, yeah, Bowie had done so much tackling in that game, gets an inside ball, and Slater scores. We lose 16-12 game one. And I just remember sitting there thinking, I'm a huge basketball fan, and you'd see teams lose 2 games in a series of 7, and they're like, well, they did what they're supposed to do. You know, they're supposed to win at home. You know, now we're supposed to go home and win. And going into game 2, I felt confident. We had a good record down at the Olympic Stadium, and there was a real tussle. It wasn't high scoring by any means, but it was, again, 12-8 with not long to go. And I actually overkicked the footy that Choki Uarte batted back in, and GI dropped it. If he had caught it, they probably win the series there, but he dropped it. We had a scrum. Piercy hit me, beautiful pass. Was able to help Minnie score a try. And then game 3, we just focused so much on the first 20 minutes of trying to beat the ambush, and we just couldn't get it. And I think it was 16 or 18-0 in the first 20, and it ended up 34-24, but it wasn't really a contest. And I think looking back, you know, we probably deserved to win game 1, but you don't get anything given to you. Queensland had that, you know, they scored last and they made that play, but yeah, if we had that was a series. You know, if we had won game 1, I felt like we would have won game 2. You know, we did win game 2. So great experience. Really met some great guys, and, you know, I'm always going to divide opinion on whether I should have made it or not, but it was a really, really good experience. The Dragons were flying at that time. I think we had 8 in that series, 8 players. So, really, really cool.
I want to talk to you about the build-ups and how it compares, because obviously prior to that, you got to experience the grand final, the build-up to that. How does it compare with an Origin build-up? Is it different levels, or they're pretty similar in terms of big game? Yeah,
well, you get on the piss for the first 2 days, pretty much, or you used to. I don't know what you do now, but it's the only game on, so it's very similar to a grand final. I think there's enough press and dinners and stuff like that you get presented to, but I think with a grand final it goes a lot quicker because you've played the week before, whereas Origin you have that weekend off leading into it, and the build up around flying to. And I think the coolest thing was getting this police escort to the game in Queensland.
Yeah,
it was mad. Like, you just can't believe that the whole whole of us eastern side of Australia stops to watch this game. So,
Do you get to go down Caxton, or they weren't doing that then?
no, we went down the night before. You weren't allowed to
Yeah.
go down on the night. But yeah, I think the thing for New South Wales fans is they're so tribal that they probably weren't cheering all of us on at that time.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I think the best thing that Mads did and Freddie and that is they feel like you put your, for one night only, you can put your allegiances away or alliances away for that team to cheer on New South Wales, whereas Queensland have always had that. So, yeah, it's certainly a special time of year.
I agree. I want to talk to you about a couple of the rep sort of games in a way for club land that we didn't get to touch on last week quickly. First of all, I want to ask you about the World Club Challenge, which you played 2011. Talk to us just about what your memory is of that game, and is it a different feel? Is it a different? Obviously, in a way, it feels like it's a come down from the grand final. You've won the comp. You did all that you could at the Dragons, and that was huge for the club. And then all of a sudden, a few months later, you're starting the season, and I think back then it was still over to England. So you get a bit of a trip to England, and then you become the World Club champs as well.
Yeah, we went over there. It was a short prep. Most teams had been going over there and playing a trial, and then using that for their NRL season. Whereas we played 40 minutes against the Bulldogs down in Wollongong, and then flew out the next day. It was a short trip. We got over there, trained, business-like. Wayne, unfortunately, had to come home. His mum was a bit crook at that time. So Steve Price took over. But I just remember going out there. One, it was super cold. But if you go back and watch the game, Georgie Carmont scores in the first maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Chip just over my head. I couldn't reach it. I just remember how loud it was. And straight away, and we were sort of like, I wouldn't say shell-shocked, but I would say like surprised by how loud it was. And then they got a repeat. They missed a penalty, and we kicked from the 20 dropout bounce. They come back. George Carmont scores again. And I just thought, like, holy shit, like we're in, like, this is real, not a trial, you know? So we were lucky. BMOS, I mean, he got man of the match, and rightly so, but he made a couple of big plays. He played 3/4 of the game with a hip pointer, which, you know, most people, if you've ever done that, really, really hard to play with. And then probably it was funny because BMOS made a break down the left-hand side. Kingy had just scored, so it was 20-15. They kicked the field goals before halftime of 15-14. So it was 20-15, maybe 15, 16 minutes to go. We had a huge overlap, and I ended up kicking a field goal. And Gaz and boys, filthy, you know, why didn't you pass it? You know, I was like, we go out to 6. Yeah, we can't get beat. We can tie, and yeah, we end up defending our line. But Wayne rang everyone after the game, and he asked me. He said, "Why'd you do that?" And I said, "Oh, I just didn't want to get beat 21-20 by not thinking about that. You know, I'd always been trusted in those moments from early on at the Dragons with Ben and with Wayne about take the 2, go to 6, go to 8, take the field goal whenever you feel comfortable." And they'd always trusted me with that. So like Benny Hornby didn't say anything. Yeah, he just went back to his mark, and that was, he knew. So yeah, he and Wayne just said, "Good decision, enjoy honkers." And I was like, this is mad. Like, we got on the plane. I didn't take my medal off. I drank from England because weren't allowed to drink after the game because we had the flight. But as soon as we got on the flight, it was free reign, and I drank from London to honkers, spewed in the airport, went to a bar. It was just such a good time, you know, for us, and a reward for essentially how good we'd been over the last 2 years to get to that point. And yeah, it's not talked about as much because it probably doesn't hold the prestige that it did back in the day. But you know, what England have done the last couple of years in winning the World Club Challenge, I think it's put it back on the map. And sometimes it gets pushed aside because of the internationals and everything else that happens. But it was really, really cool.
Yeah, no, I thought it was. And yeah, that's a great little story there. And would have been great to be part of that plane trip. I'll tell you what, there would be some stories up there in that in the clouds after that trip. So that you would have had some characters in that team. So goodness me, who knows what would have gone on.
Mate, the only one I can probably share is Jace Nightingale and I was sitting next to each other, and back when stick cricket was like a thing,
Oh, yes,
on
love
your
it.
phone, and Jace had it, and we decided. I mean, this is how simple-minded we are, but we decided that we're going to try and finish it from London to Honkers, and you had to get a certain amount of runs at over. Anyone that knows. Anyway, he was drinking red wine, I was drinking white wine, and he'd come back, and because we're in business economy, like there's enough room there, and it's pretty luxurious, but we had the Qantas pajamas on, and he come back and spilled red wine absolutely everywhere. So our pajamas were stinking like red wine pretty much the whole trip. But it was a really good bunch of guys that had worked hard to get that reward. But yeah, Jace spilling the red wine wasn't great.
Yeah, and it just shows you, I guess, why Wayne is who he is. He just has that trust in you boys. Go out, go celebrate, go enjoy it. And probably in the back of his mind, he's going, I know when you get back, we're straight back into things. And that's the sort of club that we are at that time. One other one I want to ask you about, and from a fan's point of view, it just feels like a very strange game in terms of the Charity Shield. Obviously, again, it's classed as, I guess, that one of those sort of practice sort of games in a way, a trial game. But there is a bit more meaning behind the Charity Shield for both the Dragons and South Sydney. But it always feels like watching it, one team takes it more seriously than the other. And it sort of always feels like it's vice versa. Like everyone, like they both take turns in different years to take it more seriously. Is that a weird game to play in? I feel like it's a very strange, because it's named full strength sides almost in a way. But yeah, it just feels a bit different.
Well, if you win, you're the person that took it serious. If you lose, you only
Yeah.
used it as a trial, right? So
Yeah.
I think that was, excuse me, the first year Wayne come, we'd lost, and he treated it as a trial, which it was for us because we were still learning. But I think, it certainly means something, but I think it's got more value. Like I said, if you win, you sort of have taken it a little bit more serious versus if you lose. So the squad are larger. It is a tough game to play. Like we played one at, I think we played in Perth one year, and then we come back and played Charity Shield the week later in Sydney, and it was at the Olympic Stadium, and it was like a trial at the Olympic Stadium. Feels like it's a bit more than a trial. So. Yeah, it's a weird one. It certainly is a weird one for the players. You can say that you're fully locked in, but as you get older, you realise that it's a trial and you've still got 26 games ahead of you.
Yeah. Before we get into a bit of the preview side of things, one question that came through, I forgot to ask you last week from the fan questions. There was a question about your goal kicking and your goal kicking technique, and just how much you've worked on that over time with your playing career, because it was quite a unique style that we don't get to see with many kickers at all. But obviously it worked for yourself, and just your thought pattern behind that and how it eventuated to what it was.
Yeah, so I was a horrendous goal kicker as a junior. My stepdad made the point. He said, if you ever go to Sydney, boy, they're going to choose a halfback that can goal kick over one that can't. So I worked really hard at that. And then when I came to Sydney, he actually, we were living together, and he would stand behind me. I didn't know at the time, but I lined one up from in front when we'd go goal kicking, and I went to run in, and just as I was about to kick it, he blew the whistle, and I'm not sure. He'll tell you it missed. I reckon it went through, but he blew a whistle, and I blew up at him. I said, what are you doing? He goes, well, what are you going to do if a fan's doing that? Like, he just always had a way of articulating stuff to me for the future. And in some of my biggest moments, I kicked one in 2011 to send us the golden point against Brisbane in the semi. I was thinking about that whistle and waiting for that whistle. So, that was sort of my focus at that point. But when I went to the Dragons, I was never really a great goal kicker. And I look now and I think, career percentage of 72%, I probably, wasn't a great goal kicker, but I worked really, really hard at it to be able to get to that point. And when I went to the Dragons, I had the yips Kurt Wrigley, I was horrendous. I was just missing kicks. At one stage, Brownie had me kicking inside the 20 or the scrum line at goal, and then Gaz kicking outside. Like, that's how bad I was going. But Kurt Wrigley organised Graham Arnold, the Socceroos coach, to have a one-on-one session with me, and he just explained things about angles and moving in. And I'd had Daryl Halligan, I'd had Craig Fitzgibbon help me at the Roosters, and I think it's a mature thing, but I'd enjoyed working with those guys, and especially Chook. He'd explain some things to me about approach and exit and all that stuff. But the one thing about Graham was he explained about moving into the ball. I was very stagnant and slow into the ball, and he'd explain from a free kick point of view in soccer or football that Ronaldo moves into it, and this is what he does, and all this kind of stuff. So I just used that. The march, I don't know where the march came from or the run up or anything like that. It just sort of became a thing, and being OCD, I stuck with it. But now when I work with kids, I use a lot of those teachings from Graham and also Daryl Halligan about approach and exit and angles and all that kind of stuff. So really, really cool that I got to a point. I think probably one thing that hurt me was BMOS scored 50 tries in 2 years out in the wing, so that probably didn't help me. But
plenty of practice.
It's out wide's only a practice. That's right. So, but it was cool to be able to now, as a footy head. Well, I've always been a footy head, but now explaining to players about angles and all that kind of stuff, I really enjoy, and I've been big thankful that I've learnt that off them.
You mentioned the OCD side of things. I want to quickly know of yourself. Was there any go-to rituals before games? Was it a go-to meal or something? It feels like you might have had something being OCD.
Yeah, the whole day was pretty much planned. I used to have 2 cans of V before the game. So one on the way to the game, one as I was getting strapped. I forever and a day, I still now put my right shoe on, right sock on first, get my right ankle strapped, strap my right wrist. I used to plait my headgear at a certain time to a certain song. I was pretty much planned down to a T, and that preparation, I would say the socks and all that kind of stuff was before Wayne, but the preparation, he used to have a saying, you prep's your own time. And not everyone's going to do everything the same. There's shots of Wendell Saylor dancing to Taylor Swift, and I'm sitting in the back yawning, and Wayne put it up in the video. He said, this is perfect. See how he's sitting back. Like, I'd yawn before a game, and that usually meant I was super relaxed and prepared. Sometimes when I'm a bit antsy, I'd probably maybe have missed a training during the week or something like that. But, you prep's your own time. That was a valuable lesson. But, a lot, even to I annoy my wife now about certain things. If I've got to be there at 1 o'clock, I'm there at like 12:15, and she's like, why are you so early? I was like, I just don't want to be late. So... definitely got a lot of tendencies.
Very much the same. And don't lie to us, it was Taylor Swift on your headphones as well. We know it.
No, definitely not mine, because Dell had all the cash. So